my first parade, and it was great, but the whole city is just going nuts, so I thought I'd take a nice little drive along the banks of the Mississippi and visit some of the plantations. The River Road runs along both banks of the Mississippi River and leads to numerous former sugar and cotton plantations. I went as far as Vacherie, 40 miles along the west bank, to visit two very different plantations. First stop was Oak Alley. This pre-Civil War mansion is set at the end of a row of 300-year-old oak trees. These trees were planted 130 years before the house was even built, and no one knows by whom or what for. The mansion has been restored and stocked with antiques, and all the tour guides dress in period costumes.
Okay, now, y'all, back in 1837, the hallway flooring was brick, and our third owner was Mr. Antoine Sobral. He had very rambunctious sons, and they would race through the hallway. The only thing is that they raced on horseback, and they destroyed all of those original brick floors. Now we're going to continue this way.
Oak Alley is beautiful. It evokes an age of genteel southern living, gone with the wind, mint juleps on the terrace. But the thing is, they left out part of the story. The slave quarters haven't been preserved, and there isn't a mention of slavery in their guidebook. I think that's what you call a whitewash of history. Just 10 minutes up the road, I'm at Laura Plantation. It's not nearly as impressive as Oak Alley, but here you get the whole story. This plantation house was built in 1805 in the traditional, colorful Creole style and is named after Laura, one of the owners.
A French-speaking family lived here, and until this century, about 1920, if you rode down the River Road and saw a house painted white, they spoke English inside. If you saw it brightly painted, no white paint, they spoke French. You can see what they spoke here. They wanted you to know there's two worlds out here, and by God, this is not the other one. Laura's family was a Creole family. They'd come here in the 1690s. And on this plantation, which was in sugarcane for 200 years, women were the presidents for 84 years straight.
So the plantation passed down the line to the women?
From one generation to the next. Not because they were female, but because in the Creole system, you always gave the business to the smartest child.
Most notorious of the matriarchs to run this place was Elizabeth, Laura's grandmother, who controlled the slave population with ruthless brutality. How many slaves lived here?
The greatest number was 185, and two families lived in each one of these small houses. They averaged about 5 to 6 people per side, and people lived in here in these little shacks until 1977.
And where did Elizabeth get her slaves?
She bought them. And she bought, in 1830, 30 female slaves for the sole purpose of having them impregnated over and again. Elizabeth, Laura's grandmother, thought it was more economic for her to breed slaves than buying them, and she bought those 30 women, and 10 years later had what she called a crop of kids.
Laura was the last member of the family to own the plantation. She witnessed enough of her grandmother's cruelty to know that she wanted out of the plantation system and the confines of traditional Creole life.
For instance, Laura is playing on this well when she's 7 years old, and a man came up to her to get water for his mule. She knew him. He was 65 years old, Philippe. She, standing on the well, has never been so close to him before, and she notices above his eyes markings. She said, what's this above your eyes? He said, I was branded by your grandmother when I ran away in the swamps to be free. And when they brought me back here, she took the branding with her initials and branded me.
Today, the events that took place all along the Mississippi during the years of slavery are still barely discussed.
It's very hard to talk about slavery. We are still, we have our racist past in Louisiana and in the South in the United States. And to talk about issues like that, it's difficult for people.
It's close to home. The history of slavery is a tragic, dramatic, and emotional one, and clearly it's a history that people in the South still feel very, very sensitive about. I mean, Laura Plantation is the only plantation within 300 miles where they even deal with the issue of slavery in their tours. And you do get the whole story here, but I get the feeling that the story is told in such a way so as not to offend anyone.